Hey everyone, Sam here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. So in this video, 5 composition ideas to improve your landscape painting. Now, composition is one of those things where it's quite often overlooked, especially if you're copying photos. There's quite a tendency to just copy the photos exactly, especially if you're new to painting. And this is something that I have been guilty of myself in the past before I realised I need to start sketching and designing the compositions. Now, in my opinion, the composition in a painting is just as important as getting your colours and your values correct. So in this video, I'm just going to show you 5 simple compositions that you can incorporate into your paintings. And many of these I actually learnt from this book here. This is The Composition of Outdoor Painting by Edgar Payne, who's one of my favourite artists. He was a plein air painter and did these magnificent plein air paintings of mountain scenes, the American Southwest. Just really beautiful work. Now, before we get into the video, I'd like to tell you about my Patreon channel. I've got full-length painting tutorial videos on there if you'd like to delve more deeply into painting. Each month there's a new painting tutorial video, plus I've got bonus videos, exclusive content, and I'm going to be adding loads more things to it as well. So check that out, link in the description below. Okay, so let's get into the video. So just before I get into the 5 composition ideas, I'm just going to show you a couple of photos that one of my subscribers sent to me. Now, these are really beautiful photos. This one here is a lovely landscape with rolling hills, lots of trees. There's so much in this photo that could create a beautiful painting, but straight away there are things in it that really needed to be changed in order to create a nice painting. So the main thing that was really annoying me about this photo is there's loads of repeating lines and vectors in there. So we've got a row of trees here in the foreground, then in the midground there's repeating lines of trees, and these are really distracting. So what I did here was I imported the video into Procreate, which is a digital drawing program which I've been using on my iPad. I'm still new to it, so these weren't that great. It wasn't that great the way I was using it, but I was doing my best. I'm still learning how to use it. But what I did was I started to move things around. So I started to move this row of trees, and I created a group mass of trees here in the lower foreground on the right side of the painting. So getting rid of some of those lines. Then I created a secondary focal point here in the midground. I also got rid of the lines of trees also in the midground and created some more random masses in there. And now in the picture it kind of leads the eye. We've got the group mass of trees in the foreground, and then the eye's led off into the distance. So this is something we can change, and when we're painting landscapes, we're artists, we're not creating photos, so we can change things. We have this advantage. Okay, so next photo here. This is a mountain scene, a great subject for a landscape painting, and there's lots of things in this photograph that would make a great painting, but in its current form it's a terrible composition and it needs sorting out. So what I decided to do with this one was to create a Steelyard composition, and I'll explain what that is in just a moment. So I moved the fir tree here. I'm using Procreate, so I imported this photo into my iPad, and I put the fir tree to the right of the center, so making sure it's not in the middle of the composition, and then it's balanced by this group of trees that's in the midground on the left side of this photograph. I also moved the mountain more towards the middle, but making sure that the summit of the mountain isn't directly in the middle of the photograph, so I've made it to the right of the center. Now, it's really important not to have object in the center of your composition, and I'll go over some things to be avoided in composition at the end of this video. Now, the advantage we have as artists is we don't have to copy the photos directly, and in fact I would advise against it. I often use several photos when I'm painting an artwork, and also I will have very often done a field painting as well on plein air, so getting outdoors painting will also really help in understanding composition and your design process. The other thing I would strongly recommend is pencil sketching to design your composition. I'm obviously have been recently using Procreate just because I like the features that it has, and it can help with the design process, but pencil sketching is a really good habit to get into because it just helps you design compositions and allows you to gain a better understanding of it. So in this next part of the video, I will now show you the 5 compositions that I incorporate into a lot of my paintings, but these are relatively simple compositions that you can keep in mind, especially when you're painting outdoors, that you can incorporate into your paintings. So let's start with the first one. The Steelyard Composition. This is one of the simplest compositions that you can incorporate into a landscape painting, and it's one that's really good to apply if you're painting outdoors on plein air, and also a composition that the artist Edgar Payne used a lot in his paintings. Now it consists of a large mass that's counterbalanced by a smaller mass on a theoretical fulcrum. So this could be like a large tree that's in the foreground and then counterbalanced by a smaller tree that's away from the centre, more into the distance. And this composition overall incorporates balance in the scene that you're painting. So if we have a look at a couple of my paintings here, this one is of a scene in Queenstown. I used to live there. This is a place in southern New Zealand, and there's lots of willow trees and poplars that grow there. So in this particular painting, I created a large willow tree here, and then it's counterbalanced by this group of trees here in the midground. This next painting here, I painted this outdoors on plein air, and it's a Lombardy poplar tree trunk, and then it's balanced by those other Lombardy poplars that are in the midground. And then this last painting I did, again, it's a tree in the foreground. I think it was a birch tree, I can't remember now, and then it's counterbalanced by these poplar trees as well. And then also we've got the mountain in the background as well, which added to the overall atmosphere of the painting. So that's the Steelyard Composition. The Circle or O Composition. So this is another simple composition you can incorporate into your landscape paintings, and it's an area in the composition where there's an opening within the masses that you're painting, or it could be an opening within the landscape. Basically anything that's going to form a kind of circular gap in the composition that's going to create some interest. So if we have a look at some examples here, again these are some of my paintings I've done over the last few years. This particular scene is a mountain scene, and the opening here is the floodplain in the midground here beneath the mountains. This was inspired by a place called Glenorchy in southern New Zealand. This next painting is a seascape. Again, I've created an opening around where these rocks are just to convey some space in the painting. And then the last one, this is a scene of the Bay of Islands in northern New Zealand. It's about a few kilometres away from where I live. So we've got this beautiful vista here, and then I've created an opening which is there in real life actually, but where the ocean is, and then we've got those background hills as well. The Compound Curve or S Composition. Now this is a really useful composition, and it's one that I incorporate into a lot of my landscape paintings. And basically it will be an element in a painting such as a river or a pathway, or anything that leads the eye towards a focal area, so forming a kind of S shape. So again, I'm going to use some of my paintings here as an example. So this particular one I painted outdoors on plein air many years ago in the Glenorchy area of southern New Zealand. So quite simple, we've just got a stream here and it leading the eye towards the background mountain. The next one here, this is one of my more recent paintings. This is one of the Rees Valley in southern New Zealand. Quite simple, we've got the stream here, the river that's leading the eye towards those distant mountains again. And then this one, a very recent painting, if you looked at my video that I made a few weeks ago on painting rocks. So this is a seascape. Again, we got the rocks in the foreground and there's an opening and a kind of channel that's leading the eye towards that breaking wave there. And this is a painting I did a few years ago. This is a tropical seascape. This was inspired by a beach that I went to in Thailand when I visited Thailand a few years ago. Again, it's just leading the eye towards in between the rocks and towards that distant island there. So this is a really useful composition to use because it can really add rhythm and flow in your painting. So just adding things like a path, a road, a river, all really useful composition ideas. So number 4, the group mass composition. So this is where you have a mass of objects that's the main focal area of a painting. Normally when you're painting landscapes, or at least when I'm painting them, usually the group mass I tend to use is normally trees, but it could be things like buildings or something like that, anything really. But what it is it's a group of masses. So we'll use trees as an example. So if we look at some of my paintings here, this one is a plein air painting I did. It's some nice rolling hills and there's a group of pine trees that I've grouped together here. And the next one is another plein air painting I did. It's a mountain scene, again in the South Island of New Zealand. Again, there's a group of pine trees. Now, one of the things I do when I'm painting a group mass of trees is making sure that they're not all the same size and shape. So I try to vary the sizes and shapes of them to add interest. And then this last one is a studio painting that I literally did years ago. Again, it's a mass of trees. We got some poplars and sycamores there. In fact, actually, I made a video on this a few years ago called How to Paint Trees, one of my earlier videos. So you should check that out. It's also incorporating an S composition as well, because there's a pathway that leads the eye towards it. So you can actually incorporate some of these different compositions as well into your one painting design. The only thing I would say is try not to overcomplicate your composition, because it might just be distracting or distract the composition. Could spoil the composition basically. So this last composition on the list, number 5 here, is the diagonal line composition. Now this one's a little bit more tricky, but can be really effective if you're painting things such as mountains. And basically this composition is basically a line that goes from maybe the upper right to the lower left or vice versa in the painting. So it's kind of like forming a line or a series of lines, and it works well with mountains. But the one thing you need to be careful of is you don't want your eye to come off the canvas, so you might need to put some objects towards the end of your lines. For example, it could be some trees or something, just to break it up at the end to stop the eye from going off the canvas. And also some opposing lines as well helps. So in this case, this was a plein air painting I did. We've got the background mountain there that just helps to break up that dominant line that's forming the side of the hill here in the foreground. And then this next painting, again inspired by the South Island of New Zealand, Glenorchy, is just a beautiful place if you ever get a chance to visit. It's just a brilliant place for plein air painting. I really can't wait to go down there again actually. But in this case, lots of mountain scenes here. So this group of mountains forms a nice kind of diagonal composition, and then I've got some other elements in the scene as well to help stop the eye from coming off the edge of the canvas. So there's some trees in the midground, for example, and some other, the water in the foreground just helps to add interest to the composition overall. But this is a really awesome composition that you can use, particularly if you're painting things like mountains. And I've seen other artists' paintings where they're painting things like, I think areas in America where they're painting like the Grand Canyon, for example, those types of landscapes. I've seen some really awesome paintings that kind of incorporate that type of composition. So that's it for the 5 composition ideas for your landscape paintings. But before I end the video, I just want to quickly tell you, I can't remember if I told you this in the beginning of the video, but there's actually some lesson notes a blog post that I've written on this, and I've put the link in the description box below. Before I finish the video as well, I'm going to go over some things to be avoided in composition, and I'm again going to be using some of my old paintings as examples here. So these are actually paintings I painted about 13 years ago after a long break from painting, and I'd gotten back into it and I wasn't thinking about composition, which is really stupid because it's really important. So let's take a look. So one of the main things that you should not do in composition, and I've seen this many times and I've seen many a good painting spoiled by this, and that's to have your focal area right in the middle of your painting. It just causes this awful displeasing static in your painting, and it can really spoil your composition. So using this painting as an example, this was a painting I did. Again, it's a seascape in New Zealand somewhere. I can't even remember where it was now, but the island there is right in the middle of the composition, and it's spoiled the composition in my opinion. So the next thing, carrying on with seascapes again. This particular seascape, I painted this 13 years ago, and as you can see, the horizon line is dead in the middle of the composition. So we've got equal amounts of sky and equal amounts of seascape in the bottom, and again, it's just distracting. It's really displeasing in the composition. So this is something to be avoided, especially when you're painting something like seascapes as well. You need to decide whether you want more of the seascape to be in the composition, so going for perhaps a higher horizon, or perhaps you'd like more of the sky and some distant cliffs or something, and you might want to go for a lower horizon, but never have your horizon line in the middle. Now the next thing here, and this again was one of my earlier seascapes and when I was trying to teach myself how to paint waves, but if we look at this composition, there's just loads of repeating parallel lines in it, and again just really distracting in the composition. So parallel lines, that's something we need to try and avoid, and we also saw that in the photograph at the beginning of the video. And then lastly, things like repeating equal shapes and masses, and even now I'm still can end up accidentally painting this, so I try and avoid it in my landscape paintings. But if you have a look at this seascape, you can see some of these rocks are all equal sizes and shapes, and again, it's just too predictable and starts to be distracting in the composition, also making it look a little bit repetitive and boring. So we want to try and mix things up and just make that painting look engaging and dynamic. Incorporating these 5 composition ideas will really help that, and in general just keeping your compositions more simple as well. Less is definitely more. So I hope you enjoyed this video on composition and it's given you some ideas. As I say, I definitely recommend that book, Composition of Outdoor Painting by Edgar Payne, because it's just as applicable to studio work as well, and it's really helped me a lot with learning about composition. I've also learned lots of things from painting with other artists as well. Don't forget also the lesson notes, the blog that I told you about that accompanies this video. I've put the link in the description box below. And if you'd like to learn more about painting landscapes, check out the free resources I have on my website, especially my painting blog at samuelearp.com. I also have full-length painting tutorial videos there for sale as well, and you can get instant access to all of my painting tutorial videos and more by subscribing to me on Patreon. There's a new full-length painting tutorial video plus lesson notes and reference photos every month, and there's about 2 years worth of previous painting videos as well. I'm also adding even more content, such as extended time-lapse videos, and there's going to be more bonus content that I'm going to be adding to that shortly. So I really want to add much more to my Patreon channel, make it the best value for money ever. So check the link below, it's just $5 a month. As I say, link in the description box below. Also, one last thing, if you subscribe to my mailing list, I'm giving away a free ebook, Introduction to Oil Painting, which you can get for free when you sign up to my email list. So again, thanks for watching. Be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Feel free to leave me a comment. Have a beautiful day, and I shall see you in the next video.